Today, we're going to uncover a truly fascinating secret. We're taking a journey through the Quran, the Hadith, human history, and modern science to look at one of the most remarkable creations in the entire animal kingdom. We're going to see how an animal we all recognize instantly is actually this profound biological marvel, and how it carries a deeply powerful spiritual lesson for us.
But first, I want you to just picture a scene. It's the last part of the night. You're out in the desert and it is completely, utterly silent. Then, suddenly, a sound breaks through the darkness. Thud, thud, thud. A horse is galloping at full speed. Its breathing is incredibly heavy. Its hooves are striking the hard rocks beneath it, and with every single impact, sparks are flying up into the cold, dark air. Now, this animal isn't thinking about fear. It's not thinking about its own exhaustion. It's completely ignoring its own safety. It is simply, intensely obeying its rider. And then, the Lord of the universe immortalized this exact cinematic scene in the Quran. Listen to this translation of Surah Al-Adiyat. By the racing horses, panting, and striking sparks of fire, and charging at dawn. So let's dive into this. That brings us to our hook. What is so incredibly special about a horse that the Creator himself swore by it? This highly dramatic, sensory imagery of panting and sparks, well, it isn't just poetic language. It's actually a gateway to understanding some incredible historical realities and, as we're going to see shortly, some truly mind-blowing scientific truths. Let's start by looking at Chapter 1, the backbone of civilization. To really get this, we have to imagine a world with absolutely no cars and no airplanes. For centuries, human civilization depended entirely on horses to survive and expand. Kings rode them to build empires, messengers absolutely relied on them, and travelers needed them to cross brutal, unforgiving deserts. That historical reality is exactly why we see this specific mention in Surah An-Nahl. And he created horses, mules, and donkeys for you to ride and as an adornment. What's amazing here is that the Quran beautifully and deliberately distinguishes between these three animals over 1,400 years ago. They aren't just lumped together as, riding animals. They're categorized separately because each served a highly unique role. You had the horse for speed and power, and the donkey for resilience and carrying heavy loads over really difficult terrain.
And here is where modern science perfectly validates that ancient distinction. A mule, as you probably know, is the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. It combines the endurance of the donkey with the strength of the horse. But genetically, it's absolutely wild. Horses have 64 chromosomes. Donkeys have 62. And the mule sits right in the middle with an unusual 63. Because of that odd number, most mules are totally sterile and can't reproduce. Now, modern genetics only discovered this biological boundary recently, yet the Quran identified them as distinct categories 14 centuries ago. How amazing is that? Now, let's shift our focus back to the desert of 7th century Arabia. Picture a vast horizon. Suddenly, a huge cloud of dust rises up, and the thunder of hooves just fills the air. Back then, the horse wasn't just a way to get from point A to point B. It was the ultimate war machine. It was literally the equivalent of a modern armored vehicle. This military supremacy is reflected perfectly in Surah Al-Anfal. Prepare against them whatever force you can in steeds of war. Classical commentators, including renowned scholars like Ibn Kathir and Al-Tabari, actually explained that these steeds of war represented the absolute pinnacle of military readiness for that era. Back then, having strong horses meant having security and real power. Which brings us to Chapter 2, the science of the stallion. We're zooming out from 7th century history to look at what modern scientists discovered when they finally put these magnificent creatures under the microscope. And trust me, the biology here is just as breathtaking as the history. A horse can reach explosive speeds of almost 70 kilometers per hour. That's about 43 miles per hour. That biological fact perfectly matches the divine imagery we read earlier of the racing horses. And what happens when a horse runs that fast? Let's look at the Quranic word dubhan. It refers directly to the heavy breathing or panting of a horse running at full speed. Biologically, horses possess an incredibly efficient yet massive respiratory system. When they hit that 70-kilometer-per-hour sprint, their lungs are working like giant bellows, creating that exact intense panting sound immortalized right there in the surah. This beautifully illustrates another marvel, which is their field of vision. While human vision gives us roughly 180 degrees of sight, mostly just what's right in front of us, a horse has a nearly 350-degree panoramic view. They can see almost everything around them at all times. This means a horse detects danger from almost every single direction. Knowing this actually makes its willingness to charge headfirst into a terrifying battle even more extraordinary, right? It sees literally all the danger, yet it still obeys. And a horse's loyalty has a profound biological basis, too. Its heart can weigh several times more than ours, and its heart rate can exceed a staggering 220 beats per minute during intense exercise. Furthermore, research proves they can recognize human faces, they remember our voices, and they actually respond to our emotional expressions. Their legendary loyalty isn't just a metaphor, it is deeply rooted in their physiology, their memory, and their massive pumping hearts. Now let's transition over to Chapter 3, Prophets and Their Horses. Given everything we've just learned about their power and their biology, it is so beautiful to reflect on how the prophets interacted with these majestic animals. The Quran tells us about the mighty prophet Sulayman, or Solomon. Surah Aal describes a moment when fine, swift horses were displayed before him in the afternoon. Imagine this mighty king observing his prestigious, incredibly powerful horses at sunset. They represented immense strength and prestige, yet Prophet Sulayman always remembered that his true power belonged only to Allah. Later, in Medina, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, marveled at these creatures as well. In a narration from Sahih al-Bukhari, he said, "Goodness remains tied to the foreheads of horses until the day of resurrection." He even mentioned that keeping a horse for a noble cause means its food, its drink, and its traces are all counted as rewards. What an incredible, enduring honor bestowed upon an animal. And that goodness absolutely continues today. Lots of people think the age of the horse is over just because we drive cars everywhere now, but horses remain invaluable companions in the modern era. From Olympic equestrian sports to polo and racing to mounted police units, search and rescue missions, and incredibly moving equine-assisted therapy, they are still serving humanity in so many ways. And this brings us to Chapter 4, the ultimate spiritual lesson. We've looked at the history, the science, and the prophetic tradition. Now we arrive at the most profound lesson of Surah Al-Adiyat, which is a grand juxtaposition. Think of the loyal horse. We've established how it runs into danger with 350-degree vision, pushes its massive heart to 220 beats per minute, gets exhausted, gets wounded, yet remains totally and completely obedient to its human master. And immediately after describing this, Allah shifts the focus to the human being, a human being who is often so ungrateful and so disloyal to the Creator who gave them absolutely everything. It is a stark, incredibly powerful contrast. The message here is clear. The next time you see a horse running, you aren't just looking at an animal, you are looking at a creature praised in the Hadith, a scientific marvel of endurance and memory, and a timeless lesson about obedience and faith. The greatest signs of Allah are literally running right before our very eyes. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the very question that this incredible animal forces us to ask ourselves. The horse risks everything for its master. It pushes through exhaustion and fear out of pure devotion. So ask yourself, how loyal are you to your Lord?